So in today's video, I want to have a discussion around something that people have asked me a lot of questions around, which is how do you learn how to have hard conversations around allyship? And this is something that I've thought about a lot. This is something that I personally struggle with on a day-to-day basis, but usually it's because I've forgotten something really important and fundamental about how I show up to allyship, which is I've leaned too hard on the concept of hard. I haven't really found a way to explore what in me is making showing up in a way that is aligned with how I see myself as an ally difficult. In exploring that, it helps me to figure out what I need to do next. So the reason why I call the program that I've been working on Mastering the Game of Allyship, because again, play is so important. And it's usually when I've lost that playful spirit that I can't show up to people effectively. When I don't have that playful spirit and I try to have a hard conversation, people read judgment in my thoughts and words. They feel attacked. They don't feel safe. And what I've learned in doing this work for the last few months is that until people feel safe and supported, they're not really interested in changing. And even if they do change, it'll just reinforce a pattern that'll make it more difficult for them to make the next change. So what I would invite people to do is explore what about these conversations is hard. Again, if you're anything like me, the difficulty comes from the fact that you desperately have a vision for someone else that you want them to connect to. It's like, I know that you can do better, and so I'm going to invite you into that vision. But it's rarely an invitation, is it? It's usually more of a coercion. Even when people do things like asking, like, why do you believe this way? Why is one of the worst questions you can ask someone, because it's an invalidating question. It shows up to people and says, there is a right way, there's a wrong way, and I'm not certain that you're doing the way that I think you should be doing. So there are a few principles that you can sort of work on to invite people into a higher perspective. Again, they have to do it on their own, so these techniques will help you create a safe space in conversation to invite people to change. So first and foremost, you have to understand their perspective before you can prescribe anything. Even if you think you understand it, you have to go into the conversation and give them an opportunity for them to tell you that they believe you understand their circumstance. If you do not do this, any part of them that's listening to the conversation and wants to interject and wants to protect themselves, that's the first thing they're going to use against you to prove that your whole argument's invalid, that you're terrible, and that you're ruining their life. So when you recognize something in someone that you're like, ooh, this might need correction, first thing you want to do is take a step back, and you'll want to figure out, okay, from their perspective, what is the highest good that they might be going after? And how do I reflect that back to them so that they know that I see where they're coming from? Just this activity alone is going to make it really easy for you to have a better conversation, because you're no longer going to be in reactive mode, because that's usually what's happening. You're usually reacting to someone who's reacting to something else. So you got to stop the reaction cycle somewhere. So let it be with you. Listen with curiosity, figure out where they're at precisely. Again, I think some people can get here and then they miss the mode and the level of precision that you need to get to understand where people are. There's no room for cutting corners, because you can only invite someone to the very next adjacent level that they have available. Because if you go higher than that, it's too much work. You're gonna be telling them that they're bad and that you're good, even just by saying there's a higher level and you have to go to there. But if you invite them into some place that they've already been thinking about maybe playing around with, it's what we call the adjacent possible. If you invite them into the adjacent possible, or invite them into a conversation where they can creatively solve a problem of their own, that's a win. And that's it, and it has to be enough. Most people fail at these conversations because they're attached to a specific outcome instead of the process. So what you gotta do is relinquish outcomes, meet people where they're at, invite them into the adjacent possible, And here's the big one. This is one that I use all the time. Ask questions. If people come to their own conclusions, they're going to be more likely to go after them. If they have to take your advice, they can always reject it. Now, here's the thing. People are going to know when you're asking leading questions, so you truly have to ask questions that will call them into a higher version of themselves without making you the arbiter of the person who's going to do that job. So you have to be willing to walk away. You have to be willing to, having reached someone's edge, be like, oh, cool, that was great. Thank you for even going just there with me, so that you can leave the conversation on a positive space, so that if you do choose to come back, you'll be invited because, oh, wow, you actually had a really nice conversation with me. You listened to me, you asked a lot of questions, you felt engaged, and then you left. If you are going to bring your perspective into it, you've got to ask for permission. So usually these hard conversations are people trying to tell someone something about their experience, which is great, but you have to ask. Because if they don't have the bandwidth for it, really what you're doing is trying to make them drink something that they're not ready to have. And once you've gotten permission, you're going to have to use storytelling. When you use storytelling, it invites people into a perspective where they're able to take on your perspective. If you give them a rant, if you give them a breakdown, if you make them a character of this story without their permission, none of those are going to work. So you have to tell a story about your own experience. You got to be open. You've got to tell about like your inner landscape and all the stuff that happens. And you're going to have to be open to someone having an allergic reaction even to that. So if they're not ready to give you the quality listening that you need, feel free to take care of yourself, leave the situation, but recognize that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and that just having consistent, positive, growth-fueled conversations related to storytelling, using curiosity, is going to, at the very least, invite people to want to engage with you more than how everything is sort of happening on the internet right now. So it's very hard, but it can be done, especially if you use those principles. So let me know what you think, and go out and have some of those hard conversations.